Have you ever won an argument and felt like a winner? I'll tell you a truth that no one says out loud. The moment you felt victory, you had already lost. Not because you were wrong, but because you entered a game that cannot be won, by definition. Today, we will break down 7 levels of this trap, and the last one is the most uncomfortable because it is about you. A Japanese Zen master once told his student, "You are arguing with the river. The river does not hear you. It just keeps flowing." The student didn't understand. He was young. He thought the truth wins. 20 years later, he returned to the master and said, "I get it now. The problem wasn't the river." The master nodded. "The problem was that you decided to argue in the first place." So let's start exactly there. When you step into an argument, you think you're talking to a person, to their reason, to their logic. You think that if you just pick the right words, the right arguments, they will hear you, understand you, and agree. But that's an illusion. Arthur Schopenhauer, a German philosopher who lived a long life observing people with cold precision, wrote about this directly. A person doesn't enter an argument to find the truth. They enter an argument so they don't lose. Let those words sink in. Not to understand, not to learn something new, but to avoid losing. And this is where the first level of the trap begins. When you present an argument, you think you're appealing to a person's mind, but you are actually attacking their identity. Because a person doesn't separate themselves from their beliefs. Their opinion isn't just a stance, it's a piece of who they believe they are. Imagine a samurai who has carried a sword from a specific school for years. You walk up and say, "Your sword is wrong." He doesn't hear that. He hears, "You are wrong." And his hand instinctively reaches for the hilt. This is what happens in every argument, every single time. So the moment you start explaining, it's not your opponent's reasoning that turns on, it's their defense system. From then on, everything you say passes not through analysis, but through a threat filter. They are no longer listening to you. They're looking for where you made a mistake, where they can hook you, where they can twist your words. Not because you're wrong, but because they need to preserve the feeling that they are themselves. What should you do right now? Think back to the last argument you got into. Answer yourself honestly with just one question. Did you want to understand? Or did you want to prove a point? Don't judge yourself, just see it. Because the one who sees the trap has already taken a step out of it. But that's only the first level. And most people don't get stuck here. They get stuck on what we'll unpack next, on an illusion that looks like intelligence, but isn't. In a Japanese monastery, there was a monk who knew thousands of texts by heart. He could quote for hours, argue until dawn, and he defeated everyone. One day, an old master came to him and simply asked, "Have you ever doubted what you are saying?" The monk was at a loss. He had no answer. The master bowed and walked away. They never spoke again because the master had no one to speak to. That is the essence of the second level. People confuse the ability to speak with the ability to think. You see someone who speaks confidently, loudly, with arguments and quotes, and you think, "Now there is a brilliant mind." But look deeper. If you strip away the words, what's left? Usually, emptiness. A well-rehearsed script, a set of phrases that sound convincing, but with no real thinking behind them. Because real thinking is a quiet, internal, deeply honest process. It's the ability to say to yourself, "What if I'm wrong?" And not just say it, but endure the feeling. Not run away from it into a defensive posture. Not drown it out with a new argument. It hurts. It requires a strength that most people simply don't possess. so the majority takes a different path. They grab a ready-made position from their family, their environment, the news, or social media. They repeat it, defend it, and call it their own opinion. In Japan, there is a concept called kata, an empty shell, a form without substance, a beautiful vessel with no water inside. That's exactly what most arguments look like from the inside. Beautiful words, a confident voice, absolute emptiness. What should you do right now? Pick one of your own beliefs, any belief you consider obvious, and ask yourself, where did I get this? Did I verify this myself, or did I just accept it? You don't need to change your belief immediately. Just ask the question. That alone separates a thinking person from a talking person. But just knowing this doesn't save you, because there is a third level. And it's about the crowd. It's about why even a smart person starts thinking like everyone else and doesn't even notice. Imagine a bamboo forest. On a windy day, every single stalk bends in the same direction. Not because it's the right way to bend, but because that's the way the wind is blowing. And the one stalk standing straight up looks strange, wrong, dangerous. People are like bamboo. A person rarely forms an opinion on their own. They absorb it from their surroundings and then defend it as their own. Not because they verified it, but because it became part of their identity, part of their place in the group. The crowd provides a sense of safety. If you think like everyone else, you don't stand out. You don't become a target. You don't have to think deeply, you just have to repeat. And when you show up with something different, you automatically become a threat. Not because of your arguments, but by the very fact of your existence. Because you force people to doubt. And doubt means instability. It means losing the ground beneath your feet. It begs the question, what if I was wrong this whole time? Most people aren't ready to handle that, so they take the easy way out. They reject, belittle, laugh, and shut down. If you keep pushing, you only strengthen their resistance. You aren't opening their eyes, you're driving them deeper into the rabbit hole. What should you do? Right now. Stop being surprised when people reject the obvious. It's not stupidity, it's a survival instinct. When you understand this, the anger fades away and a deep calm takes its place. And that calmness is what gives you real power. But here is where most people make a critical mistake. They think, okay, I get it. I just need to explain it softer, calmer, pick better words. And they try again and again. This is a trap inside a trap, and it brings us to the next level. There was a master in Japan named Takuan. A young warrior came to him and said, "Master, I want to convince my lord to change his decision. How do I do it?" Takuan asked, "Does he want to change his decision?" The warrior fell silent. "No." "Then you don't want to convince him," Takuan said. "You want to defeat him. Those are two different things, and only one of them is possible." Here is the fourth level. The harder you push with logic, the stronger the resistance. It's not an accident, it's a law of nature. When you drop a heavy argument, you aren't clearing a path to the truth for that person. You are amplifying the threat. You are backing them into a corner. And a person in a corner doesn't start thinking, they start fighting. That is exactly why the most obvious things so rarely get through. Not because they're complicated, but because people don't want to accept them. Truth is rarely rejected because it's weak. It's usually rejected because it's inconvenient. And here you have to ask yourself an honest question. Why are you explaining anything at all? Why are you proving your point? Why are you trying to get through to them? If the answer is so they understand, you've probably already made a mistake. Because understanding cannot be forced. It's something a person chooses for themselves, and if they aren't ready, you can talk for hours and there will be zero result. The real reason is almost always deeper. You want to be proven right. You want to be heard. You want your opinion to carry weight. And right here is where the flip happens. At this moment, you are no different from the person you're arguing with. You are defending too, just not their position, but your own. You are also terrified of being wrong. You also need to save face. An argument isn't a search for truth. It's a collision of two fears. What should you do right now? The next time you feel the urge to prove something, stop for 1 second and ask yourself, do I want to find the truth, or do I want to win? That single question can change everything. But stopping is easier said than done, which brings us to the 5th level. It's about why, even knowing all of this, people keep arguing. And this is the most insidious level of all. There is a practice in Japan called mu. It translates to nothingness, emptiness. When a student asks the master a question, sometimes the master just stays silent. Not because he doesn't know the answer, but because the silence is the answer. Silence is often perceived as a weakness, a lack of arguments, a defeat. But in reality, it is one of the most powerful tools in existence. When you don't react, you don't enter the game. You don't give the other person anything to grab onto. You don't feed the conflict. You leave them entirely alone with themselves. And in that moment, a strange thing happens. The person who expected resistance doesn't get it. Their system doesn't know how to react because it was wired for a fight, and there is no fight. Silence isn't the absence of an answer. It is the conscious choice not to spend yourself. Marcus Aurelius, a Roman emperor who didn't need to prove anything to anyone, wrote in his journals, "If something irritates you, the problem isn't the thing. The problem is your perception of it." When you truly understand this, you stop turning on autopilot. They insult you, you don't react. They provoke you, you look at them calmly. They misunderstand you, you just keep walking. Not because you don't care, but because you choose where to spend your energy. In Japanese Budo, the martial arts, there is a core principle. Don't block the strike, step off its path. To block means to spend energy. To step aside means to keep it. Silence is stepping off the path of the strike. What should you do right now? Pick one situation this week where you would normally reply, and just don't. Stay silent. Watch what happens to the situation and watch what happens to you. But silence is only part of the journey because a wise person doesn't just stay silent. They choose. And the 6th level is exactly about that. It's about who is actually worth talking to. A calligraphy master in Japan would never give a brush to someone who didn't know how to hold it correctly, not out of cruelty, but because he knew a wrong start ruins the whole piece. It's better not to start at all than to start wrong. A wise person chooses who to speak with. Not every dialogue has meaning. Not every person is open to understanding, and that is perfectly fine. The problem begins when you try to talk to everyone the same way. When you try to explain to everyone, prove it to everyone. In that moment, you are handing out your energy to people who are incapable of receiving it. Energy is a limited resource. Attention is a limited resource. Focus is a limited resource. Seneca, a man who lived under the most brutal emperors of Rome and kept his mind crystal clear, wrote, "Life is too short to waste it on useless things." Arguments that lead nowhere are one of the most invisible drains on your life. They produce zero results, but they steal your energy. And the most dangerous part is you don't even notice it happening. You walk out of a conversation tired, irritated, feeling misunderstood, and you either want to keep going or prove your point even harder. And so the cycle repeats. A wise person asks themselves one question before every conversation. Is there a chance for understanding here? If the answer is no, they don't engage. No emotions, no pushing for a conclusion. They just don't engage. Because they've realized a very simple truth. Not every conversation needs to be won. Most conversations shouldn't even be started. What should you do right now? Think of 3 people you regularly argue with. Answer honestly. Has even one of those arguments ever changed anything? If not, you already know the answer. And now we've reached the final level. I warned you it's the most uncomfortable one because it isn't about other people. It's about you. It's about what happens inside you when you think you are just defending the truth. One day, a student came to a Zen master and said, "Master, I understand everything you've taught me. I no longer argue with fools. I stay silent. I choose my battles. I am free." The master looked at him for a long time and asked, "Then why are you so proud of it?" The student didn't understand. If you were truly free, you would have no need to tell me about it. Here is the final level. As long as you can be dragged into a stupid argument, you are still inside the system. You are still reacting, still proving, still defending. And in that moment, you are no different from the person you're arguing with. You also want to be right. You also don't want to look foolish. You also get angry when you're misunderstood. Ask yourself a simple question. Why does this even bother you? Why is it so important for you to prove your point? Why can't you just stop and walk away? The answer is rarely on the surface. Most of the time, it's not about the truth. It's about validation. It's about wanting to be heard, wanting your opinion to carry weight, wanting to be taken seriously. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's a basic human need. But it is exactly what makes you vulnerable. Because in that moment, you can be controlled. All someone has to do is poke your point of view and you turn on. The more they misunderstand you, the harder you try and the deeper you sink. You think you're controlling the situation, but you were dragged in a long time ago. True intelligence isn't the number of arguments you have or the ability to speak beautifully or knowing philosophy. It is the ability to stop. To stop the moment you feel the pull to answer. To stop when you are being provoked. To stop when you've almost started proving your point. Because that is the exact moment that decides who you really are. If you can be triggered into an emotional reaction, your knowledge is worth nothing. In real life, what matters isn't what you know, but how you act. You could know everything I've said in this video. You could be nodding along, agreeing. But if in a real situation you reply again, argue again, drain yourself again, it means you have the knowledge, but not the strength to apply it. And strength isn't something abstract. It is a specific action, or rather, the absence of action. Not replying, not engaging, not continuing. It sounds simple. In practice, it's one of the hardest skills in the world, because it goes against habit, against the ego, against the burning desire to prove yourself right. And that is exactly why it separates those who just understand from those who truly control themselves. There is one last thing. You are not obligated to explain. You are not obligated to justify yourself. You are not obligated to prove your point of view to everyone who disagrees with it. That is not your responsibility. Your responsibility is your time, your energy, your attention, your life. And when you truly begin to understand this, everything changes. You stop seeing every argument as a challenge. You stop seeing a threat in every disagreement. You stop feeling the need to prove something to someone. You become calmer. Or more accurately, you become free. Because you no longer depend on someone else's reaction. You can state your opinion and not wait for a reply. You can hear disagreement and not get triggered. You can face sheer stupidity and not try to fix it. And there is immense power in that. Not in winning, but in choosing not to play. Remember the student from the beginning who was arguing with the river? 20 years later, he realized the problem wasn't the river. The problem was that he thought his words could change the direction of the water. The river flows where it flows. A wise person doesn't argue with the river. They build a boat and sail. Sometimes the smartest answer is no answer at all. Sometimes the greatest victory is refusing to fight. Sometimes true freedom begins with one simple decision. Not today. Think about that. Drop one word in the comments. Just the word that captures what you're feeling right now. Maybe it's calm. Maybe it's recognition. Maybe it's something uncomfortable, the exact thing we talked about in the 6th level. Be honest, because being honest with yourself is the beginning of that very emptiness, that moo. If this video hit home for you, hit the subscribe button. We have plenty more of these conversations ahead. Quiet. No unnecessary noise. Right to the point. I'll see you on the next walk. Listening to this profound reflection on human nature brings a deep sense of peace and clarity to my soul. It makes me realize how often we blindly surrender our precious energy to battles that were never meant to be won. The lesson here is deeply humanistic, reminding us that true strength does not roar in the face of opposition, but rather smiles in the quiet grace of self-control. When we step away from the desperate need to prove ourselves right, we suddenly create room for genuine compassion. We begin to see that the person arguing across from us is not a malicious enemy, but simply a frightened human being desperately trying to protect their own fragile identity. This shift in perspective transforms our anger into empathy, allowing us to heal rather than destroy. Choosing silence over retaliation is not an act of surrender, but an ultimate expression of respect for our own limited time on this earth. Every time we refuse to engage in a toxic debate, we reclaim a piece of our inner freedom. I truly believe that applying this wisdom can fundamentally elevate how we live and love. Instead of trying to force the river to change its course, we can finally learn to build our boat and enjoy the beautiful journey. We can choose to nurture conversations that build bridges instead of walls. Imagine a world where we listen to understand the pain behind someone's rigid beliefs, rather than tearing down their arguments just to feed our own ego. By protecting our mental peace, we become better friends, better partners, and better humans to everyone around us. Letting go of the endless desire for external validation allows us to discover an unshakable worth within ourselves. Ultimately, walking away from a pointless fight is the most beautiful victory of all, because it means you have finally conquered yourself. The views and interpretations expressed above are personal perspectives intended for inspirational and motivational purposes only, and they do not constitute professional, psychological, or behavioral advice. Listeners are responsible for their own life choices and actions.